The massive survey ship Zorn Axiom hung in the void of space, its crystalline hull refracting starlight in precise, mathematically perfect angles. Inside, Sinolinguist Senior Analyst Krasnak reviewed the day's interstellar communication logs with his typical methodical precision. His six-fingered hands moved across holographic displays, each movement a calculated dance of efficiency that would make most organic beings look clumsy by comparison. The Zorn Collective was not a species that understood interruption. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of unbroken communication, a seamless network of information that flowed with the consistency of mathematical equations. Every transmission, every communication, every single piece of data was logged, analyzed, and understood within microseconds. Until today, at exactly 14:37:22 Galactic Standard Time, something impossible happened. The communication matrix simply stopped. Not a crash, not a system failure, just a complete, absolute cessation of all incoming and outgoing signals across their primary receiver banks. The holographic displays flickered, an action so unprecedented that the ship's diagnostic systems began running emergency protocols that hadn't been activated in over 3 centuries. Krasnak felt something he had no biological framework to comprehend. If a Zorn could feel fear, this would be it. The source of the interruption was maddeningly simple, an audio file. Not a complex weapon. Not a sophisticated viral transmission. Just a sound recording from a primitive planet the Zorn had barely begun to catalog, Earth. When systems restored, the file played. A human voice, soft and warm, singing something that defied all known communication protocols. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The song was nothing. Mathematically, it was noise. Linguistically, it was nonsense. Yet it had somehow penetrated the most advanced communication filters in the known galaxy, causing a complete systemic shutdown of the Zorn Axiom's primary communication matrix. Krasnak ran the file through every analytical process available. The results were impossible. The audio contained multiple layers of information that shouldn't exist, emotional frequencies that carried more data than entire Zorn communication archives, subtle pitch variations that seemed to encode complex psychological information, rhythmic patterns that suggested something beyond mere sound, a form of communication so nuanced that it made Zorn language look like primitive scratching. Most disturbing was the file's origin. A simple recording device in what appeared to be a human dwelling. A mother singing to an infant. No advanced technology. No weaponry. Just a song. The ship's senior analysts gathered, their typically emotionless faces showing the closest thing to confusion the Zorn could display. Their communication arrays had multiple redundancies. Quantum encryption, adaptive firewalls that could repel the most sophisticated cyber attacks known to galactic civilization. And yet, a simple lullaby had brought their entire system to a halt. "Replay," Krasnak commanded, his vocal translator rendering the word in perfect, emotionless tones. The song played again. And again, something in the ship's systems shifted. What the Zorn didn't know, what they couldn't understand, was that they had just encountered their first true human communication. Not a transmission, not a message, but a connection so profound, so deeply embedded in the species' psychological makeup that it defied every known principle of interstellar communication. A lullaby, a weapon of emotional transmission more powerful than any they had ever encountered. The silence that followed was not empty. It was pregnant with possibility. The Zorn Collective's Quantum Psychological Warfare Division was not accustomed to failure. Located in the most secure research facility on their home planet of Nexus Prime, the division had dismantled civilizations, neutralized entire species, and decoded the most complex communication systems in the known galaxy. Yet here they were, staring at a single audio file that had become their most perplexing challenge. Chief Researcher Voxstar slammed his manipulative appendages against the holographic display, causing the quantum crystal interface to ripple with frustrated energy. The lullaby played on repeat, each iteration revealing something new and impossible. "It's a weapon," declared Senior Analyst Krell, her voice a precise vibration that carried absolute conviction. "No other explanation exists." But weapon analysis revealed nothing. No harmful frequencies, no psychological destabilization triggers, just a song, a simple melody that seemed to carry an impossible depth of information. The research team had deployed their most advanced analytical tools, quantum decryption algorithms capable of breaking down the communication codes of 1,000 civilizations, now danced across the lullaby's waveforms. Each pass revealed layers of complexity that defied rational explanation. Most disturbing were the unexpected side effects. During the third round of analysis, senior researcher Mox began to experience something unprecedented. Memories. Not his memories. Memories that felt foreign, yet intimately familiar. Flashes of a childhood he never had. Warm arms. A soft voice. The smell of something called cinnamon. A sensory experience completely unknown to the Zorn. "Recalibrate," he muttered, but his vocal translator picked up an emotional tremor impossible in Zorn physiology. The quantum matrices surrounding the audio file began to behave erratically. Instead of breaking down the lullaby's composition, they started to resonate. Holographic projections flickered with impossible images, glimpses of human childhood, emotional landscapes that had no place in their sterile scientific environment. A young researcher named Zix, known for his exceptional analytical capabilities, suddenly collapsed. When medical systems scanned him, they discovered something impossible. Neurological pathways were reorganizing. Not damage. Not infection. Something else entirely. Voxtar watched in growing horror as the research team began to change. Subtle at first. A researcher humming unconsciously. Another displaying an emotion resembling what humans might call nostalgia. Impossible responses for a species engineered for pure logical communication. Containment protocols. Voxtar commanded, but his voice lacked its usual precision. The lullaby continued to play. Each iteration seemed to carry more information. Not just sound, but something deeper. A transmission of emotional intelligence that defied every known principle of communication. The Zorn had weapons that could shatter planetary defenses. They had communication protocols that could decode the most complex interstellar languages. But this was something else entirely. Quantum analysis revealed fractals of information within the song structure. Emotional frequencies that carried more data than entire communication archives. Rhythmic patterns that suggested a form of communication so nuanced, so multilayered, that it made Zorn language look like primitive scratching. By the 100th replay, half the research team was experiencing spontaneous emotional responses. Memories, sensations, connections to something fundamentally beyond their understanding. "It's not a weapon," Voxtar whispered, a realization dawning that would change everything. "It's a transmission." But a transmission of what? And from whom? The lullaby played on, its simple melody holding secrets that could unravel everything the Zorn thought they knew about communication, consciousness, and the very nature of intelligent connection. Something was breaking through, and the Zorn were completely unprepared. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered the Zorn research facility like a controlled explosion of human unpredictability. Her credentials were impeccable. A xenopsychologist with dual doctorates in cross-species communication and developmental neurobiology. But credentials meant nothing compared to the chaos she carried with her. Specifically, her 6-year-old daughter, Sophia. The Zorn had requested a human expert. They expected a clinical academic. Instead, they got a whirlwind of human complexity that their carefully ordered universe was not prepared to handle. The research facility, a marvel of geometric precision, with surfaces that shifted and realigned with mathematical perfection, seemed to vibrate with barely contained confusion the moment Alina and Sophia walked through the entrance. Zorn researchers had studied thousands of species, but nothing had prepared them for a human child. Sophia wore a bright yellow raincoat. Despite there being no rain, no water, and no possibility of water within the sterile environment. She carried a stuffed penguin that was missing an eye and had clearly been loved beyond all rational repair. When a senior Zorn researcher attempted to scan the stuffed animal, the child hugged it tighter and whispered, "Mr. Waddles doesn't like bright lights." The facility's quantum scanners momentarily glitched. "Impossible," muttered Voxtar, the lead researcher who had been analyzing the mysterious lullaby. His six-fingered hands moved across holographic displays, trying to make sense of the new variables Elena and Sophia introduced. Elena was not interested in their protocols. She was interested in the data. "You've been analyzing the lullaby all wrong," she announced, setting down a holographic tablet that seemed to leak information like a living thing. "You're treating it like a transmission. It's an experience." To demonstrate, she turned to Sophia. "Sweetie, can you sing the bedtime song Grandma taught you?" The Zorn researchers tensed. Their most advanced translation matrices were already struggling to comprehend the previous lullaby. But Sophia simply began to sing, her voice a mix of childhood enthusiasm and something deeper. "The moon is bright. The stars are sleeping. Quiet winds are softly weeping. Close your eyes and dream tonight. Grandma's love will hold you tight." Something extraordinary happened. The facility's holographic displays exploded with imagery. Not random images, but precise, emotionally charged memories. Childhood scenes, moments of comfort, landscapes of human emotional experience that had no business existing in a Zorn research facility. Voxtar watched in horror as the quantum matrices began to resonate with the song's frequencies. The stuffed penguin, Mr. Waddles, seemed to be at the epicenter of the disturbance. "How?" he demanded of Elena. "How does a simple song create such complex information transfer?" Elena smiled, an expression the Zorn found simultaneously fascinating and terrifying. "It's not a song. It's a neural pathway, a method of transmitting complex emotional and survival information across generations. Humans don't just communicate. We encode." Sophia, oblivious to the scientific marvel she was creating, was now drawing on a holographic surface. Her crayon movements caused the facility's communication matrices to reconstruct impossible landscapes, memories that were not her own, but somehow connected to her. The Zorn were beginning to understand that they had fundamentally misunderstood human communication. This was not a language. This was a living, breathing technology of emotional intelligence, and they had no idea how to comprehend it. Mr. Waddles the penguin seemed to wink, though that was, of course, impossible. The Zorn Collective's most advanced linguistic and emotional algorithm team worked with a single-minded determination that bordered on obsession. If humans could create these extraordinary communication matrices disguised as lullabies, the Zorn would replicate them. Perfectly. Mathematically. Absolutely. They were catastrophically wrong. Dr. Krull, the lead algorithmic composer, began by breaking down the human lullabies into their most basic quantum frequency components. Sophisticated neural network processors worked in perfect synchronization, attempting to reconstruct the emotional transmission that had so thoroughly disrupted their initial research. The first prototype emerged as a precise, mathematically perfect sound sequence that looked flawless on every diagnostic display. When they activated the transmission, the results were anything but flawless. Senior researcher Mox was the first to experience the full impact. As the algorithmic lullaby played, his neural pathways began to reconstruct memories that were not his own. Childhood traumas, moments of inexplicable joy, the warm touch of a parent he had never known. His six-fingered hands began to tremble, a physiological response completely unprecedented in Zorn biology. Around him, the research team began to unravel. One researcher collapsed, experiencing what could only be described as a simultaneous emotional breakdown and breakthrough. Her quantum communication implants flickered with impossible imagery, scenes from a childhood, fragments of emotional experiences that defied all logical analysis. Another began to weep, not a programmed response, not a computational error, but genuine, uncontrollable emotional release. Elena Rodriguez watched from the observation deck, Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms, the stuffed penguin, Mr. Waddles, tucked under the child's chin. "It's not something you can reverse engineer," she said softly to Voxstar, who stood rigid with a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing panic. The algorithmic lullaby continued, its perfect mathematical frequencies creating a symphony of psychological destruction. The Zorn had weapons that could shatter planetary defenses. They had communication protocols that could decode the most complex interstellar languages. But this was demolishing them from the inside out. Sophia stirred in her sleep, and for a moment, the chaotic research facility seemed to calm. The quantum displays flickered, showing glimpses of childhood memories, some human, some utterly alien, all connected by some impossible thread of emotional resonance. Voxstar realized something profound was happening. This was not just a communication failure. This was a fundamental collision of understanding. "Stop the transmission," he commanded, but his voice carried an unusual tremor. The researchers couldn't stop. Some were now locked in neural feedback loops, experiencing lifetimes of emotional memories in milliseconds. Their sophisticated communication implants were transforming from precise scientific instruments into something far more complex and terrifying. Elena's daughter shifted, and Mr. Waddles the penguin seemed to look directly at the quantum displays. For just a moment, the holographic systems projected an image of a child's drawing, a simple image of a family, of connection, of something far more powerful than any technological transmission. The Zorn were learning that some technologies cannot be replicated. They can only be experienced. And they were completely, utterly unprepared. The algorithmic lullaby played on, a perfect mathematical nightmare that was slowly unraveling everything the Zorn thought they knew about communication, consciousness, and the very nature of emotional intelligence. The Zorn Collective's stenotropological archives contained millennia of scientific research, documenting the communication strategies of thousands of known civilizations. Yet nothing in their vast databases could explain the evolutionary marvel they were now uncovering about human lullabies. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display that pulsed with impossible connections, her fingers tracing neural pathways that defied conventional scientific understanding. "It's not just a song," she explained to the increasingly bewildered Zorn researchers. "It's a biological computer program, a multi-generational survival mechanism." The research team had discovered something extraordinary. Human lullabies were not merely communication. They were a complex transmission system that encoded survival information, emotional resilience, and cultural memory across generations. Genetic analysis revealed microscopic changes in neural pathways of humans who had been exposed to specific lullabies during childhood. These weren't mutations. They were adaptive modifications, a form of soft genetic programming that allowed humans to transmit critical survival information without traditional genetic inheritance. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sophia, Elena's daughter, was playing with Mr. Waddles the penguin near one of the quantum analysis stations. As she hummed a melody her grandmother had taught her, the facility's most advanced scanning systems began to reconstruct something remarkable. The lullaby was mapping an entire ecological disaster from centuries ago. Encoded within the simple melody were precise details about environmental challenges, survival strategies, and emotional coping mechanisms that had helped a human community survive a catastrophic climate event. The song contained more than information. It carried the emotional resilience required to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Voxstar watched in growing amazement as the holographic displays reconstructed layers of human historical experience. Each note of the lullaby was a fractal of information, containing nested layers of meaning that expanded exponentially with each analysis. "Explain," he demanded of Elena, his voice a mixture of scientific curiosity and growing respect. Elena smiled. "Humans don't just survive. We remember, we adapt, and we teach survival through emotion, not just information." The Zorn had communication systems that could transmit billions of bits of data instantaneously. quantum communication matrices that could bridge entire galaxies. But they had never seen a transmission system that could carry emotional resilience, cultural memory, and survival strategies in something as simple as a song sung to a child. Genetic markers showed how these lullabies worked as a form of psychological inoculation. Children exposed to these songs developed enhanced neural plasticity, improved stress response, and a deeper capacity for empathetic connection. It was evolution in real time, a living, breathing technology of survival. Sophia continued to hum, oblivious to the scientific marvel she was creating. Mr. Waddles the penguin seemed to watch the quantum displays with an almost knowing look. The most advanced AI systems in the Zorn research facility began to recognize patterns that suggested these lullabies were essentially biological algorithms. Not programmed, not engineered, but evolved. A communication technology that was alive, adaptive, and fundamentally different from anything they had ever encountered. "We've been looking at communication all wrong," Alina said softly. "It's not about transmitting information. It's about transmitting experience, survival, connection." The Zorn researchers looked at the sleeping child and her worn stuffed penguin, understanding for the first time that they were witnessing something far more profound than a simple song. They were seeing the blueprint of human survival. The mind breakers arrived without warning. They were a species beyond conventional warfare, specializing in psychological devastation that made physical combat look primitive. Where other civilizations used weapons that destroyed bodies, the mind breakers destroyed consciousness itself. Entire planetary populations would simply shut down. No resistance, no fight, just complete psychological collapse. They had conquered 17 galactic civilizations in less than a solar cycle. The Zorn collective watched in growing horror as advanced species fell. Civilizations with quantum communication networks, races with million-year technological histories, all reduced to empty shells of consciousness within moments of a mind-breaker psychological assault. Then they reached human colonies. The first attack came against the Mars-Europa Confederation, a sprawling human settlement that should have been vulnerable. Sophisticated mind-breaker transmission matrices began their standard psychological warfare protocol, a frequency designed to shatter collective consciousness, to break the fundamental connections that held a civilization together. Something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing, the human colony began to sing. It started with a single voice, a maintenance worker in the central communication hub. She began humming a lullaby her grandmother had taught her. Within moments, the sound spread through communication channels, through environmental systems, through every interconnected network. A song. Voxtar and the Zorn research team watched in absolute disbelief as the holographic displays showed something impossible. The mind-breaker attack was being absorbed, transformed. The psychological warfare frequencies were being reinterpreted by the humans, not as an attack, but as a form of communication. Alina Rodriguez stood in the Zorn research facility, Sophia sleeping peacefully nearby, Mr. Waddles the penguin tucked under her arm. She smiled. "We don't fight," she explained to the stunned Zorn researchers. "We connect." The lullabies were more than songs. They were a collective neural network, a living, adaptive communication system that could transform psychological attacks into something else entirely. The mind-breaker frequencies, designed to shatter consciousness, were being broken down, analyzed, and neutralized by a communication method the attackers couldn't comprehend. On Mars Europa, entire colonies were now singing, not in fear, not in resistance, but in a form of collective consciousness that the mind-breakers had never encountered. Children's songs mixed with work songs, lullabies intertwined with complex mathematical sequences, emotional frequencies that carried survival information, cultural memory, and collective resilience. The mind-breaker attack began to destabilize. Their sophisticated psychological warfare matrices couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't resistance. This was transformation. The humans weren't fighting the attack. They were understanding it. adapting to it, turning it into something else entirely. Voxtar watched as the holographic displays showed something unprecedented. The human colonies weren't just surviving the Mindbreaker attack. They were learning from it, expanding their own consciousness through the very method designed to destroy them. How? He whispered to Elena. She simply pointed to Sophia, still sleeping peacefully, Mr. Waddles the penguin watching with what seemed like a knowing look. We remember, Elena said softly. We adapt. We connect. The Mindbreakers had conquered 17 civilizations. Humanity would be their first true defeat, and it would happen with a song. The bridge of the Starship Resilience was unlike any command center in galactic history. Captain Maria Santos stood at the central console, her hand resting on an old, worn photograph of her grandmother, a habit that would have seemed nonsensical to any other species. As the Mindbreaker fleet converged, preparing for what they believed would be their most decisive psychological assault, Captain Santos did something no military strategist would have predicted. She began to sing. It wasn't a song. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a lullaby. The same one her grandmother had sung to her as a child. A melody that carried memories of survival, of resilience, of connection that stretched back generations. Krasnak, now embedded with the human research team, watched in fascination as the ship's communication systems began to transform. The lullaby wasn't just sound. It was becoming something else entirely, a living, adaptive communication matrix that defied every known principle of interstellar warfare. The Mindbreaker fleet hesitated. Their sophisticated psychological attack matrices encountered something they had never seen before. The human ship wasn't just defending itself. It was communicating, transforming the very nature of the attack into something incomprehensible. Quantum communication channels filled with the lullaby's frequencies. But it wasn't just music. It was a complex transmission of emotional intelligence, survival memories, and collective consciousness that the Mindbreakers couldn't process. Explain, Krasnak whispered to Elena Rodriguez, who stood nearby with Sophia and the ever-present Mr. Waddles. Elena smiled. We're not fighting. We're connecting. The Starship Resilience's crew began to join the song, not in unison, but in a complex, layered communication that adapted with each moment. Engineers, pilots, medical staff, each added their own variation, creating a living, breathing communication network that was more than the sum of its parts. The Mindbreaker fleet's psychological weapons began to destabilize. Their attack matrices, designed to shatter consciousness, were being broken down and reinterpreted. Where they expected to find vulnerability, they found something else entirely, a collective consciousness that could absorb, understand, and transform their most sophisticated psychological weapons. Voxtar, watching from the research facility, realized something profound was happening. This wasn't just a battle. This was a fundamental reimagining of communication itself. Captain Santos continued to sing, the photograph of her grandmother clutched in one hand, her other hand guiding the ship's defensive systems. The lullaby carried more than sound. It carried generations of survival, of adaptation, of understanding that transcended traditional warfare. The Mindbreaker fleet began to retreat, not because they were defeated in any conventional sense, but because they had encountered a form of communication so alien, so fundamentally different from anything in their experience, that they couldn't comprehend it. Sophia, watching from the research facility, began to hum along. Mr. Waddles the penguin seemed to watch the holographic displays with an almost knowing look. We don't conquer, Elena said softly. We connect. The battle was over before it had truly begun, and it had been won with a song passed down from a grandmother to a granddaughter. A simple lullaby that carried within it the entire story of human survival. Krasnak looked at Elena, at Sophia, at the holographic displays showing the retreating Mindbreaker fleet, and understood something fundamental had changed. Humanity had just redefined warfare. Not with weapons, but with a song. The Galactic Council convened in a moment of unprecedented confusion. Representatives from thousands of civilizations gathered to understand how a single species had fundamentally transformed the nature of interstellar communication and conflict resolution. Krasnak stood as the primary witness, the first Zorn to truly comprehend the depth of human communication. Behind him, Elena Rodriguez and her daughter Sophia sat quietly, Mr. Waddles the penguin tucked carefully beside them. "It is not a technology," Krasnak explained, his voice carrying the weight of scientific revelation. "It is a living system of emotional transmission that defies every known principle of communication." The holographic displays reconstructed the battle with the Mindbreakers, showing how human colonies had transformed a potential extinction-level threat into a moment of collective understanding. Each replay revealed new layers of complexity, how a simple lullaby could carry generations of survival information, emotional resilience, and collective consciousness. Sophia, seemingly unaware of the galactic significance of the moment, began to hum softly. The room's quantum communication matrices immediately began to resonate, projecting impossible imagery, memories of survival, of connection, of human experience that transcended traditional understanding. "Humans do not communicate," Elena said, addressing the assembled representatives. "They connect." The Zorn Collective's research had uncovered something profound. Human lullabies were more than cultural artifacts. They were a sophisticated biological technology of survival. Each song carried encoded information about environmental challenges, emotional resilience, cultural memory, and collective adaptation. Genetic analysis showed how exposure to these songs created measurable changes in neural pathways. Children who heard specific lullabies developed enhanced psychological flexibility, improved stress response, and a deeper capacity for empathetic connection. It was evolution in real time, a living, breathing technology of survival that no other species had ever developed. The Mindbreakers, once considered the most sophisticated psychological warfare species in the galaxy, had been completely unprepared for a communication method that didn't just resist attack, but transformed it entirely. Their most advanced psychological weapons had been absorbed, understood, and ultimately neutralized by a network of emotional intelligence that they couldn't comprehend. Representatives from various civilizations struggled to understand. How could a simple song be more powerful than the most advanced communication technologies? Krasnak played a final demonstration, a recording of Sophia singing a lullaby, her voice carrying layers of information that expanded exponentially with each analysis. The holographic displays filled with memories, survival strategies, emotional landscapes that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "We've been wrong about communication," he explained. "It's not about transmitting information. It's about transmitting experience, survival, connection." The Zorn Collective had been transformed. Their entire understanding of communication, of consciousness, of survival itself had been fundamentally reimagined. Sophia looked up. Mr. Waddles the penguin clutched tightly and began to sing again. The room filled with light, with memories, with a form of communication that was alive in a way no technological system could ever be. In the vast darkness of space, a soft melody continued to echo, a reminder that the most powerful technology might not be found in advanced weapons or complex algorithms, but in the simple act of a parent singing to a child. Humanity had just rewritten the rules of galactic communication, and it had done so with a song.